Welcome to the podcast Hosting Your Home. Each week, around the world, millions of guests stay in other people's homes using the Airbnb platform. Listen in as we hear stories that teach us the human side of hosting your home.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Hosting Your Home podcast. My name is Debbie Herdert. I'm not sure we can say yet that we are post-pandemic, but I'm happy to say that Rob and I are now fully vaccinated. When we first started on this global journey, I wondered if we would survive it. Rob and I stayed home like so many others. We wiped surfaces, we washed groceries, we closed our home rental, and the county closed our vacation rental. We haven't seen our children or hugged them in over a year. For the first time I can remember, I watched the news every day. Watching the news every day was not something that I ever really enjoyed, and so I simply didn't do it. But I was horrified at what was happening in our country and in our world, and never have I been more aware of how connected we all are. Part of this awareness has happened with the Black Lives Matter movement, in trying to understand what I'd previously not been aware of. My journey has taken me to interview underrepresented hosts, trying to understand how their lives are different than mine. Today's podcast is with Synta Keeling, who is a host in the Washington, D.C. area. Our conversation happened just 2 days after the January assault on the Capitol building and is now being aired, ironically enough, while the trial for the murder of George Floyd takes place. I think you'll be interested in hearing how Synta and her fellow hosts felt during the time of the Capitol assault and how her insights have helped me to understand a little bit more. I hope they will also help you. In fact, I hope that you find this episode more than entertaining, but also instructional and helpful. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Synta Keeling, for being here with me today. I really appreciate your willingness to talk to me on my podcast about what we've renamed the podcast now to be Underrepresented Hosts. Until right now, it was Hosts of Color, and then one of the people that I interviewed said that actually might be it might be objectionable to some, so we decided to rename it to Underrepresented Hosts. So a little bit of history there. Anyway, thank you for being here. Can we start by you just giving us some information about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Synta, and first of all, thank you, Debbie, for having me. I'm glad. I'm loving that we're having such a timely discussion.
Thank you.
I host in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and I have been on the platform, the Airbnb platform, since about 2014. And in my day job, I work for the federal government. I do FOIA work, Freedom of Information Act work. I'm a branch chief.
Freedom of Information Act, a branch chief. Okay, all right.
So I don't know how familiar you are with that, but basically, people want information about what their government is doing. Every federal agency has a FOIA office, and you can file a request for information, and those offices get that information. So we're vital to the press, we're vital to people trying to figure out what happened in government cases and investigations. And then, so my side hustle has been Airbnb hosting. And it all kind of began for me when I first bought my house. So I am that original host prototype in that I've always home shared from within my home. So I've been there with the guests from the get-go. And I bought my house in the southeast side of Washington, D.C., which it's a beautiful community east of the Anacostia River. And it is also predominantly African-American. I so happen to be African-American and Filipino. Mm-hmm. But for me, I found the perfect home it was a townhouse with a garage in Washington, D.C., convenient to work, convenient to Metro. It was perfect.
Oh, that's wonderful, yeah.
And I enjoyed living with people. And what I did was I I wanted to have a roommate for a temporary period of time. I tried Craigslist, and I kept hitting this barrier, this stigma. And it was the stigma of where I was in the city. In the region, there's a stigma of living east of the Anacostia River. No matter how beautiful, no matter how much we've passed from that difficult time period in our history, there's just a stigma. And I think a lot of it has to do with it being a minority community. Some friends who are frequent travelers introduced me to Airbnb, and they told me about it. They had been using it to travel more affordably all over the country, all over the world. And I asked them if they thought it would be for me, and they thought it would be great, particularly what I was trying to do. And it fundamentally solved the problem because here I am listing, my house was brand new construction, listing these beautiful photos. I'm by the metro. I'm in the nation's capital. People were booking very quickly. And because they weren't tied locally, they didn't have to, they didn't deal with that stigma. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, they wouldn't know it probably.
They wouldn't.
They wouldn't know. They wouldn't know
They wouldn't know. At least not immediately, unless they talked to somebody, I suppose. But the interesting thing about it, on this whole issue of this bias or this kind of discrimination, you made a remark about how you use the term underrepresented. A lot of people do not know that the majority of Airbnb hosts in Washington D.C. are minorities.
I did not know.
Yes. So, and
Good.
Also the city is still predominantly African American, followed by Latino. So it's again a majority minority city also. And I live in the part of the town that was not seeing economic activity, was not seeing economic development. And a lot of people were saying tourists won't care about that side of town. But when Airbnb started to grow and get traction, suddenly people, because they needed that extra money, needed that extra revenue, were listing for where I was living. And suddenly the hosts collectively were getting in 1 year $5 million in revenue. It was astonishing.
Fantastic.
So suddenly these communities that people said, oh, no one cares about that place. It's poor. There's a lot of crime. All the negative things that you could think of was flourishing because you know what? It was a real community with a lot to offer, and people just weren't giving it a chance. And when I began to see that, for me, it was amazing because this service, this home sharing, was really, really a game changer for where I was in the district.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I started getting involved with it. But then through the path of hosting, I began to see that there was something more to it about, there was this issue of bias that I was sometimes encountering. I was explained before, I'm half African American, I'm half Filipino. And sometimes, particularly with foreign guests, they wouldn't realize that. And they would come and they would lay bare their prejudices against African Americans. So there were like a lot of these awkward encounters. Now, I will say the overwhelming majority of my guests, irrespective of the race, irrespective of where they would come from, foreign or domestic, were wonderful, were kind, were polite. But there were times the hosting, particularly because I was doing it from my home, wasn't without difficulty.
So, Synta, in light of that, the specific issues that you experienced, did you feel like the person who was addressing you was being purposefully racist? Or do you think it was an unconscious bias that they weren't aware of how they were behaving?
I think it's a little bit of both. And it's something that I would experience. Well, I think it was mostly unconscious bias. But I also should say that sometimes there were unfortunate intentional interaction.
So can you give me some examples? Because unconscious bias can become conscious if you know what to look for, and if someone was blatantly rude to you, then that's something else that we can help to amplify so that we can identify it more readily.
Well, see, so my attitude about hosting is, and also one of the things in the DC area, I have a couple of Facebook groups. One of them is a group just for hosts that are east of the Anacostia River, and we prolifically talk about these issues.
Oh, great.
And I can give you some intentional examples from those folks. But let me start with a great example of unconscious bias. I hosted a young man who was coming from Europe, Amsterdam, I believe. He was visiting DC en route to his program somewhere down south for a semester or something like that. And the thing that I observed about this young man is that he was very opinionated. About Americans, and about that's not uncommon, and I'm not saying that we're perfect. I am absolutely not saying that. But off the get-go, he was complaining to me about the Confederate flag, guns, and these are all things that, for me, I tend to believe in gun control. I think the Confederate flag is treasonous, but because that's an association with being American, he was dumping all that on me, kind of a thing. Wow. So, also kind of being a lawyer, I kind of play the devil's advocate, and I preface with saying I'm not someone that's for the Confederate flag, and I'm someone that's about gun control. But sometimes these people, they think it's their heritage. And it's complicated. It's something we're trying to rid ourselves of, but it's not an easy stop when we can do as a country, right? Mm-hmm. So he didn't like that answer, and I said, well, in your country, and I think it's Amsterdam. I could be wrong, but he said, I said to him, well, in your country around Christmas time, you do this blackface Santa Claus thing. I forgot what they call it, the character, but it's like a Santa Claus figure they have that goes around small children, and it's literally in blackface.
Oh, for heaven's sake!
Coal painted blackface.
Oh, wow!
And if you see it as an American, it is jarring to see it because it makes you think of minstrel shows. He completely defended it. He said that, oh, that's just culture, that's just heritage. And I said to him, well, that's my point. And it's not defensible, but I'm just saying that it's complicated. Mm-hmm. And there's more to it than you think. That's what a lot of people here say, and I'm just trying to suggest to you why I personally think it's wrong. A lot of Americans think this way. Mm-hmm. So fast forward towards the end of his stay, he comes back to my house, and one of the things I suggest to my guests when they travel into the district, they take the metro because it's faster than taking the bus, which is also an option. Mm-hmm. But he chose to take the bus, and Debbie, he came home, and he looked like a ghost. And I said, "What's wrong? What happened?" And he started with, "I took the bus," and I said, "Okay, let's sit down. Let me hear about the bus." So he says to me, "I caught the bus around the Capitol, and after a few stops, I noticed that the white people left the bus, and then suddenly it was just black people." And he was saying it to me in a way that he knew that it was wrong, but he was being honest, and he knew that he could be potentially offending me. And so I just sort of nodded and moved my hands to say, "Continue." And he says it to me. I saw these black people, and I was scared, and I was asking myself, why am I scared? And I realized that they were not going to hurt me. These are people commuting from from their jobs going home.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then he just said, and I rode, and I'm looking around, and they weren't doing anything. What else were they supposed to do? They're just seated there, right? And he's struggling with his feelings, plus the realization that he has these feelings, these thoughts.
Yeah.
Right? And it never confronted him because he didn't know he was getting on a bus that's going to a part of the city that's 98% African American or Black American. And he gets off, he tells me, and I said, then what happened next? He goes, well, I came to the stop. I got off and I came here. So I leaned into him and I said, just to be clear, if this was Christmas, you would have not gotten on that bus for that blackface stuff, right? And he just looks at me and he smirks and he just shakes his head as to say, no, definitely not.
Oh my.
The thing about unconscious bias, and this is probably very controversial because there are a lot of folks that are minority like me who feel like it's not our job to teach.
Yes.
And that's true.
Yes.
I totally embrace that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to host and home share, you're a person of color and you're a host, these encounters are inevitable. And you can't really lie down on your laurels. Woe is me. I mean, you have to confront it if you want to make this your entrepreneurial side hustle, right?
Boy, thank you for that. That's important because that is one of the things that I was concerned about as I started doing my research before I started interviewing for this podcast. Is I know it's nobody else's job to educate me, and so it was difficult for me to ask for people to talk with me about it because that's what you're doing. You're educating me right now.
But I mean, so I'm taking it a step further, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of my friends would say, why did you even put up with that? This is your home. Like, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And it's not that I'm putting up with someone, I'm not suggesting that anyone should put up with someone as being offensive. But the thing that I have noticed is, there was a time that I taught English in Asia for a year. I lived abroad as a student exchange in Spain, and then I also practice law. You can tell people something again and again, and they'll forget or they won't care. But if you show them, and you take advantage of those teachable moments, that bus ride will never leave that young man's mind.
Yes.
His feelings, and then being shown the problem of his assertion that the blackface was just culture.
Uh-huh.
He only got it in that moment. And that comes up all the time when you're hosting. I can tell you probably don't want to hear it. I have seen it in the face of people when they realize that they are probably, as to one factor or another, racist. And they didn't know it before. And it is, for some people, crushing. And you when you book that Airbnb, you're totally not expecting that, right? Now, what you asked me about an example of intentional racism.
Yes.
So there have been so the group that I have for folks that are east of Anacostia, although lately we haven't been chattering much, the most frequent thing we'll probably talk about is how to respond to the racist reviews. And a host had a particularly racist review. And it often comes up as that they interact with the guest. The guest never raises any concerns at any time. And nothing happens to them. But in their reviews, they talk about things that just suggest they happen to be around Black people. And there's this one review where the guests complained about they felt unsafe and that it was dangerous, and they were going on and on about a man being around the house that he was going to steal or something. And she was just, the host was livid. And I reached out to her personally, and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to call Airbnb and get them to take it down. But first, in case we don't get our way, let's draft a reasonable response that sticks to the facts, that takes away the emotion, and if anything, you can flag your listing as a way to repel future racists. There's a strategy here.
Perfect.
So she starts telling me things they said. So I said, oh, well, okay. And I pressed folks a little bit, and I said to her, okay, so what about the strange dude? She said, Synta, that man was my husband, and he was doing landscaping in our yard.
Oh, dear.
They just hadn't met him yet.
Wow.
Another fun one. There was a host that had a couple of young women from France. And it's very interesting how where we live, when we have issues, we as residents and as citizens, the police won't come for a long period of time. But suddenly, for some of these Airbnb guests, they're there in seconds, doing all kinds of things, taking it upon themselves to escort them in and around the city. So happened was that these guests had arrived to another location, again, east of Anacostia, to the stop. And they had asked the cop for directions to the home. The cop was like, oh, I don't know why you're here, but you don't want to be here at all. Like, this is completely...
Well, that's racism on the part of the cop, right?
Yes, systemic racism at play. So they get to and you can imagine you're coming to the city for the first time, and it's at night, and a cop tells you that, and then he proceeds to drop you off at the address, and then you as a host, what do you do to refute that? Like they, and again, nothing had happened.
Well, what did the host do in that situation?
So in that situation, what I remember is that they just sort of explained that there's the racial dynamic, and that's that perspective of the cop, that cop doesn't have a flattering perspective of the community. But it's hard, you've already set the tone. Yeah. And now they didn't, and actually to the host's credit, what I can recall, they offered to say, look, if you don't want to stay here, I'll refund and you can, but part of it is that a lot of the reasons why our listings get booked is because the rates are a little lower, right? And so their whole budget was around being in this place. So they ended up staying in it, and it was fine. But what a jarring and awful, talk about an X factor.
Yeah.
You as a host.
Yeah. That would be a really that must be why I have seen some descriptions on Airbnb where the host kind of goes overboard to describe the neighborhood, to say, this is the composition of the neighborhood, this is the percentage of Caucasian to whatever, and
which they should
this,
not do because it's unlawful, but
probably, but I have seen it, and I've also seen that they'll put some like crime statistics, even some really general, like we have very little crime, or maybe something a little bit more specific, but that must be why you see that. It's been a while since I've seen something like that, though.
I think the thing that's different about home sharing versus owning a hotel, I don't know how to better explain it, is that you take pride in your home.
Absolutely.
And it becomes very personal, these problems, and it's very hard to recognize that may be an aberrant experience. And so therefore, you go through this emotional experience with this guest, and you apply it to anyone else, right? And the better way of handling it is I think you have to step back and what I do is what I did or have done is I step back and think about what are the things that would be concerning to a guest and put it out front on the listing. A lot of people do this best foot forward. No, I'm not about any of that. What I do is give you an honest take. It's accurate. It's not I'm not, and I don't do it in a way because I'm very proud to be in this community and to be where I am. But I say things like, I live on the easternmost point of Washington. This is not in the middle of cities. It's more suburban. There's no restaurants in the area or a grocery store. You're going to have to cook in or get your dinner before you come. So I talk about every problem that you could encounter so that you could make an accurate decision. And you can say to yourself, well, I was hoping to be in the center, but it's cheaper, so I'll go there. I'm catching all your expectations.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do. And you're only going to be able to effectively do that by taking the hits on some of those reviews and deciding, is that review fair or is that person?
Yeah.
And if it's fair, then turning it around and putting something in your listing that more accurately depicts so that you're marketing to the right guest. Something
else I've seen is the listing description that's kind of broken out to what you'll love about my place, and then another paragraph or even bullet points what you won't love about my place, so that it's kind of lined out for the traveler to see, and that works as long as that guest will read the description. And we both know that a lot of guests no longer do that; they just look at the pictures.
I use Airbnb as a guest so that I can learn and improve my listing.
Yes.
And one of the things I hate is reading through a very dense
me too.
listing. I need the important information.
Yeah.
And you have to think about, if you look at hotel websites, maybe like a Lodgify site or some of these really well done professional sites, not a lot of text.
That's right. Yeah.
And you
and a lot of bullet points
and the weaknesses pretty briefly.
Yeah.
So that's something to think of, and also to use the captions to get on those deficiencies.
Very good point. Yes. So we'll want to put, if it's okay with you, we'll want to put your listing URL in the show notes too, so that people can see your property.
Absolutely.
Now, you touched on something too that I think is really relevant here, and that is how personally we take what we do. And my feeling is that hosts. I started in this business as a vacation rental host, and then found Airbnb in like 2010. So I've been listing with them since then, and now we have a place in our own home that is separate. It's not exactly a home share, but it's like a little studio. So there's a private space for the guests. But still, it's very personal. It's my house. It's my home. The vacation rental also is a place that holds a lot of family memories that I just love. You love your places. And what I've realized is that as you love your places, you also love sharing them with people, and you really love sharing them with people who appreciate them. So every review is personal. Every person you meet is personal, and a potential friend. And back in the day when I first started the podcast, one lady described that feeling as, this is the cousin I never met, because there's such a connecting feeling, and it just, such a nice warm fuzzy, it is difficult for me to imagine having someone in my home, maybe across the hall, who doesn't appreciate what I'm offering. That would hurt.
Yeah, no, it definitely strikes to the core. I see it's this natural tension we have between instant booking and a host's desire to screen and get people to communicate and answer the questions, because we want to know that it's a good fit.
Yeah. But that piece of it also relates to bridging cultural gaps, which is something that we do all the time. I mean, you've had people from the Netherlands and from France and probably from all over the world, because of where you are. You would be really a truly melting pot of the entire globe. of people coming to DC. And I bet you've met some really, really interesting people. And you in particular, and people like you, are in a position to do a lot of educating and a lot of cultural bridging. I feel it here in Portland, and I don't have a fraction of the complexity of guests that you do.
I think one clear example of that is, I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, the United States liberalized the tourism visa for Chinese nationals. So suddenly, the tourism just went through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, they became less, generally speaking, it seemed like they became less interested in doing big group tours and decided to just book Airbnbs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a boon.
Wow.
Because they too were like, Washington, D.C., this is cheaper, I'm going to stay there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have a lot of people that are coming from a part of the world that's it's tight, densely populated, probably very homogeneous, at least compared to our experiences as our country. And in their home country, they're getting flooded with a lot of negative imagery of what it means to be African American. Maybe their only exposure is movies or music, something of that nature, right?
Yeah.
And they book this Airbnb and they're going to a community like mine, and they open the door and they probably are not meeting the prototype of what they anticipated as an American. Maybe that person is also, they didn't anticipate being in the home of a Filipino, mm-hmm. because for them, an authentic American is a white person. But they gave it a shot because they went all this way and have a great time.
Mm-hmm. And
then suddenly that host and whatever that host brings in terms of sharing their home, sharing with their community, becomes the new narrative to that person about what it is. And so that's what I think hosting allows us to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, today is January 8th, right? Mm-hmm. Yesterday, we had a siege at the Capitol building.
The 6th.
So it was 2 days ago. I'll tell you, my days are starting to blend. What's been happening in your world for you in regards to that?
It's been crazy.
Yeah.
I can't. The day that it happened, and for me, it was an insurrection. It was sedition. Mm-hmm. I have, just as a resident, even before I lived in Washington, I've been to the Capitol a lot. And Debbie, let me just tell you, the Capitol Police don't play. They do not play. They didn't play back then. It was 2-3 years ago, there was a woman who was under mental distress, a black woman who drove her car up to the Capitol and emerged, and they shot her dead. She was unarmed. And her toddler was in the car.
Wow.
I know families who are white who've gone there with their kids, and the Capitol Police weren't playing. So for that breach to occur, and after we went through all this stuff with the Black Lives Matter protests, and all that you think about. All this pent-up emotion we have from being locked down because of COVID.
Yeah.
It's just been, it's like 2021 said to 2020, hold my beer. Because you may see nothing. We're the first week, right? And to think that people would attack our Capitol when 3 people that are in line to see the president were in the building. And there was 2, 3, 4 hours where we didn't know what was going to happen to congressional members. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
It was really terrifying. We didn't know what these folks would be doing on the ground. I've been here. I was here for 9/11, and it wasn't as bad, but it was still, for me, like another incidence of terrorism, except this time we were inflicting it on ourselves.
Yep. Do you have a guest right now?
I don't. I'm not hosting primarily because of COVID.
Okay.
But at the same time, we all knew that this particular rally was going to happen, and there was a lot of back and forth in the host community here about whether or not to host. And I think a lot of us were not expecting what happened, the breach, I guess we can call it. And a lot of people are really struggling with it. I went to go pick up my kid from daycare, and there was this sign that people had boarded, that had nailed to trees, that said GTFO, you expletive. And that it's because a lot of the hotels have turned away these folks, and they had booked Airbnbs, and there's a lot of traffic about, do I host these? That's the difference between someone who shares from their home versus someone who shared an entire unit, right?
Yes.
You don't think about that. But the thing that I don't think that those folks thought about was what their neighbors or residents, because a lot of DC residents were saying that their families expressed concern, that they were interacting with Proud Boys or whatnot, and they would say, oh, that's downtown's way over there. Well, these people would go to Airbnbs in our neighborhoods. And at that point, you don't know if that was the insurrectionist, just a Republican supporter who wasn't about the violence. You don't know what.
You don't know, right?
And we still don't know. We don't know what's going to happen on Monday. Inauguration is 14 days away. It's crazy.
So I did see that Airbnb has canceled a lot of reservations. You know what makes me crazy about this is that evidently there was all kinds of information out there about the plans to take over the Capitol. You're saying that a lot of you hosts knew it, and I heard on the radio on one of the NPR stations this morning where they were saying there's Twitter feeds out there, public Twitter feeds that anybody could have read, and of course the security people probably did know about this and didn't do anything about it. I don't get it. But on the other hand, you knew, and the hotels knew, and Airbnb has canceled a lot of those reservations.
So a couple things. Locally, a lot of things that people don't understand, which is why I personally support statehood, is that because we are not a state, every governor has control of the National Guard. In D.C., you have to wait for the president or the White House to activate the National Guard through the Department of Defense. And then, even then, what they can do is very, very narrow. I actually live 2 miles from the armory where the guard was. And so where I'm rushing to get my kid, I see all these police headed towards the Capitol. Parents are grabbing their kids, getting away from the Capitol.
Sure.
And the armory was mobilizing, and people don't realize that. So if the president may not be completely on board, that can be impactful. Thank God, frankly, the vice president reached out. Thank God that the Maryland and Virginia congressional representatives reached out personally to the Maryland and Virginia governors about this. And it was, at one point, it was the mayor arranging with Virginia State Police, Maryland State Police, New Jersey State Police, and City Police to do something to get control.
Wow.
Right? So there's that. But then there's something else that I submit to you. You talk about a lot about how you're looking to educate yourself. And I think implicit in that is a recognition of how harmful racism is towards minority people, right?
Yes.
But it's harmful to us all.
Yes.
So it hurts us all.
Yes.
And in this instance, I think it was the Houston police chief. He made an excellent point, and I totally agree. He theorizes that the Capitol Police thought that these folks, because they were white, because they were the Blue Lives Matter crowd, were inherently less dangerous. Like, they were not the threat that the Black Lives Matter protesters.
Yeah. I heard that there was... Go ahead.
Here we are, 2 days later, 5 people are dead, including a cop. Mm-hmm. Not one cop died this summer with all that stuff. Not one.
Good point. Wow. We have talked among ourselves, my husband and I, about what I'm doing, and we're talking about prejudicial behavior, and he's posed the question a couple of times. Well, if we had somebody from like the Proud Boys group want to stay with us, what would we do? I mean, would it be prejudice if we told them, no, you can't stay here? I just said, I hope we don't have to answer that question, because I don't know. I don't want to have anybody like that in my home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I remember listening to one of your other episodes where someone talked about, you're not going to see Black Lives Matter signage or stuff like that in my listing. I have seen some folks put up signage in their listings so that it sort of reflects out who they are politically. So that's, I think, a legit strategy. I'm saying, I don't think you should be disingenuous about where you are or where you stand. But there are things you can do to flag where you are, and certainly if you are in the space, highlight the fact that you're there. The fact of the matter, no Proud Boys.
Great idea.
If they see that they're not booking here.
Yeah.
If they see, that's the whole point of taking that hit and responding articulately to those bad reviews that are even if they seem unfair. Because when you read it, you see it, you're like, oh, that guy is racist like me, so I'm not gonna.
It's self-filtering, isn't it?
It is absolutely self-filtering. But the other flip side to it too is that I think after Wednesday we forget that, are we talking about someone who happens to vote Republican that maybe they're a single issue voter? Are we talking about someone who just likes Trump but didn't think things that Wednesday would happen? Or are we talking about some people who were a part of the insurrection?
Yeah.
Who looted and took that furniture back with them to wherever they came from?
Yeah.
It's hard to say, and you take that risk. And one of the things I try to tell folks here locally is, you do what you do, but we're in a sensitive space where we're trying to get the city to allow us to continue home sharing. And you need to show that you're going to be conscientious to your neighbors about who you bring into our community.
Yes.
So, inauguration is 2 weeks away. If you look at Twitter, if you look online, you have these same people promising to be there, So I would just take it down. I would just take the listings down. But that's me personally.
Well, I'd like to shift gears here just a little bit and ask you about your participation in the hashtag Airbnb while black, and about your interview on Hidden Brain, Airbnb while black. Yeah.
Yes. So Hidden Brain is a NPR podcast, and they had reached out to black hosts in the area.
How did they find you?
That's what I asked them, and I think they thought, let me come to this side of the city, and then we just ping hosts. Yeah.
Wow.
So they were messaging us directly, and they said they wanted to ask host about Black guests and discrimination. And I said, oh, well, are you going to talk about the discrimination that we face? And he was like, what do you mean? So then I just sort of talked with him, and then next thing I know, he's sitting in my dining room talking to me about the things that I encountered, like the young man that I talked about before, the idea, this notion that the very space that you split, I mean, we have, where we are, we also have white hosts that they get these bookings because they're white, and then their guests come and they're like, wait, I didn't know there were going to be Black people in your neighborhood. That happens too. So, Christina Crittenden was a young woman who who decided that she wanted to travel, that she wanted to book on Airbnb. And she started sending inquiries for different bookings, and she was getting rejected or refused. So she told her friends about it, and they said, did you use your picture? And she said, of course I did. And they said, duh, they're not taking your reservation because you're Black. So she shortened her name from Cortina to her nickname Tina, and she changed the picture to a landscape picture, and then suddenly she got reservations. And she tweeted out her experience under the hashtag Airbnb while Black, and it trended. So when you listen to the episode, half of it is about what she went through as a guest, and the other half is what I go through as a host. I think that actually, I don't know how much you're aware of it, Debbie, but that's actually kind of what triggered the discussion of unconscious bias and racism on the platform that led to Airbnb making comprehensive change.
Yeah, I am aware of that, and Laura Murphy was here and did a little small group exercise with us, and that was actually the first time that I was really kind of triggered to start finding out a little bit more about my own issues, and I loved her. I just thought she was just amazing. And then shortly after that, Airbnb took the pictures of the travelers off the platform until the reservation was finalized. Yeah, and I think that's I don't have a problem with that at all. Do you have your picture on your listing as a host?
I do, but you know what? My brother is also an Airbnb host, and because he is a male, and because he favors more being Black, he looks more African American, and some people say I look more Filipino. Because he had some issues, we took a photo together, so it's a picture of us. Like a family photo, and I tell men that all the time. Like, especially if you are hosting with a partner, you should think about taking that shot. And it's kind of an unfortunate reality, but it has this weird effect on people that, in my brother's case, it led to his bookings going up.
Wow.
So yeah, it's still an issue.
So if you were going to give. If you're going to give me any advice on how to be a better host, what would you tell me? What can I take away as far as something that I can do to be more? I mean, not just for. Yeah, I want to be a better host. I feel like I'm an okay traveler. I don't have a problem with that, but I might be blind to something that I could do better.
I think probably the most important thing that you can do is when you get a booking and you have this instinct or gut, particularly if they are underrepresented in some way, I'll say, and you have this gut reaction to decline. Really ask yourself objective questions. Would I treat a white person that made this request? Or, just ask yourself those hard questions. And then also ask yourself, were there neutral factors that would point to rejecting the reservation? and also have that criterion in place in mind, and treat people the same way. Mm-hmm. If you're someone who likes to screen guests, and I think that's very important when you're starting out, and I know you know, but with instant booking, you can create those questions beforehand, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everyone gets the same questions. Mm-hmm. That's critical.
Yes.
Everyone gets the same shot. And so just be consistent in how you approach your guests. And sometimes you may have an off experience, and you have to realize that, just do what you do. Be empathetic and put yourself in their shoes, and maybe try to understand where they're coming from in the interaction.
And in this day and age of not using Instant Book because of COVID, then maybe what we might want to do is create more conversation with the guest, just so that you can have an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better. If I'm having those feelings of, I'm just not sure, then maybe I might want to have more conversation.
So yeah, my only thing that gives me pause is that, let it be you're having that conversation because you're not getting the information. Like maybe they didn't answer all 4 questions that you sent out to them. Mm-hmm. Don't let it be that I got the same amount of information.
I got it. Okay, yeah, that's a really good point.
Because it's really flagging to you your own potential own bias.
That's right. Well, Synta, this has been really, really enlightening. Very good. I really do appreciate the time that you've taken with me and the interest that you've taken to just participate in this. And it's especially riveting with where you are right now in the world.
Let's pray for our country.
Yeah, let's do that. We need it right now.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie. This is nice. I love. I think it's just the thing that needed to get me back in a better place, to have that connection with another host who gets it.
Thank you.
And thank you for building this community and reminding. It's not just about throwing up a unit in a listing. There's a real relationship here that you make. I have many wonderful friends that I consider like siblings, and they were former guests. And you and I want more hosts and more guests to have that experience.
Yeah.
I love showcasing where I live in Washington, and I think that we're kind of on the front lines of building relationships and teaching people the good that we have in our own communities and places.
Well, Synta, thanks again. This is just really great. I realize that was sort of a long episode, but I feel like it was also really important. And even though we had a grim discussion, I find Synta charming and practical. By the end of our conversation, I felt like I'd made a new friend. You'll be able to find her contact information in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and if you appreciated this podcast, your reviews are always appreciated. For inclusion in our Facebook group, just go to Facebook and search Hosting Your Home. Our website is hostingyourhome.com. And if you're interested in the community of Host to Host, you can find us at hosttohost.org. Sign up for our great newsletter. It comes out every month. Jill does a fantastic job on that. And if you want to engage in some hosting discussions, you can find us at Host to Host, Coast to Coast at our Facebook group there. Thanks again, everyone. We'll be back again soon. And get your vaccine. Bye.